The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross, Book 2, Chapter 18, which treats of the harm that certain spiritual masters may do to souls when they direct them not by a good method with respect to the visions aforementioned. Describes also how these visions may cause deception, even though they be of God. In this matter of visions we cannot be as brief as we should desire, since there is so much to say about them. Although in substance we have said what is relevant in order to explain to the spiritual person how he is to behave with regard to the visions aforementioned, and to the master who directs him the way in which he is to deal with his disciple, yet it will not be superfluous to go into somewhat greater detail about this doctrine, and to give more enlightenment as to the harm which can ensue either to spiritual souls or to the masters who direct them, if they are over-credulous about them, although they be of God. The reason which has now moved me to write at length about this is the lack of discretion, as I understand it, which I have observed in certain spiritual masters. Trusting to these supernatural apprehensions, and believing that they are good and come from God, both masters and disciples have fallen into great error, and found themselves in dire straits, wherein is fulfilled the saying of our Saviour, Si cecus ceco ducatum prestet, ambo in foveam cadunt, which signifies, if a blind man lead another blind man, both fall into the pit. And he says not shall fall, but fall. For they may fall without falling into error, since the very venturing of the one to guide the other is going astray, and thus they fall in this respect alone, at the very least. And first of all, there are some whose way and method with souls that experience these visions cause them to stray, or embarrass them with respect to their visions, or guide them not along the road in some way, for which reason they remain without the true spirit of faith, and edify them not in faith, but lead them to speak highly of those things. By doing this they make them realize that they themselves set some value upon them, or make great account of them, and consequently their disciples do the same. Thus their souls have been set upon these apprehensions, instead of being edified in faith, so that they may be empty and detached, and freed from those things, and can soar to the heights of dark faith. All this arises from the terms and language which the soul observes its master to employ with respect to these apprehensions. Somehow it very easily develops a satisfaction and an esteem for them, which is not in its own control, and which averts its eyes from the abyss of faith. And the reason why this is so easy must be that the soul is so greatly occupied with these things of sense, that as it is inclined to them by nature, and is likewise disposed to enjoy the apprehension of distinct and sensible things, it has only to observe in its confessor or in some other person a certain esteem and appreciation for them, and not merely will it at once conceive the same itself, but also, without its realizing the fact, its desire will become lured away by them, so that it will feed upon them, and will be ever more inclined toward them, and will set a certain value upon them. And hence arise many imperfections at the very least, for the soul is no longer as humble as before, but thinks that all this is of some importance and productive of good, and that it is itself esteemed by God, and that he is pleased and somewhat satisfied with it, which is contrary to humility. And thereupon the devil secretly sets about increasing this, without the soul's realizing it, and begins to suggest ideas to it about others, as to whether they have these things or have them not, or are this or are that, which is contrary to holy simplicity and spiritual solitude. There is much more to be said about these evils, and of how such souls, unless they withdraw themselves, grow not in faith, and also of how there are other evils of the same kind, which, although they be not so palpable and recognizable as these, are subtler and more hateful in the divine eyes, and which result from not living in complete detachment. Let us, however, leave this subject now until we come to treat of the vice of spiritual gluttony, and of the other 6 vices, whereof with the help of God many things will be said, concerning these subtle and delicate stains which adhere to the spirit when its director cannot guide it in detachment. Let us now say something of the manner in which certain confessors deal with souls, and instruct them ill. And of a truth I could wish that I knew how to describe it, for I realize that it is a difficult thing to explain how the spirit of the disciple grows in conformity with that of his spiritual father, in a hidden and secret way. And this matter is so tedious that it wearies me, for it seems impossible to speak of the one thing without describing the other also, as they are spiritual things, and the one corresponds with the other. But it is sufficient to say here that I believe if the spiritual father has an inclination towards revelations of such a kind that they mean something to him, or satisfy or delight his soul, it is impossible but that he will impress that delight and that aim upon the spirit of his disciple, even without realizing it, unless the disciple be more advanced than he. And even in this latter case he may well do him grievous harm if he continue with him. For from that inclination of the spiritual father towards such visions, and the pleasure which he takes in them, there arises a certain kind of esteem for them, of which, unless he watch it carefully, he cannot fail to communicate some indication or impression to other persons. And if any other such person is like-minded and has a similar inclination, it is impossible, as I understand, but that there will be communicated from the one to the other a readiness to apprehend these things, and a great esteem for them. But we need not now go into detail about this. Let us speak of the confessor, who, whether or no he be inclined towards these things, has not the prudence that he ought to have in disencumbering the soul of his disciple and detaching his desire from them, but begins to speak to him about these visions, and devotes the greater part of his spiritual conversation to them, as we have said, giving him signs by which he may distinguish good visions from evil. Now, although it is well to know this, there is no reason for him to involve the soul in such labor, anxiety, and peril. By paying no heed to visions and refusing to receive them, all this is prevented, and the soul acts as it should. Nor is this all, for such confessors, when they see that their penitents are receiving visions from God, beg them to entreat God to reveal them to themselves also, or to say such and such things to them with respect to themselves or to others. And the foolish souls do so, thinking that it is lawful to desire knowledge by this means. For they suppose that because God is pleased to reveal or say something by supernatural means, in his own way or for his own purpose, it is lawful for them to desire him to reveal it to them, or even to entreat him to do so. And if it comes to pass that God answers their petition and reveals it, they become more confident, thinking that because God answers them, it is his will and pleasure to do so, whereas in reality it is neither God's will nor his pleasure. And they frequently act or believe according to that which he has revealed to them, or according to the way wherein he has answered them. For as they are attached to that manner of communion with God, the revelation makes a great impression upon them, and their will acquiesces in it. They take a natural pleasure in their own way of thinking, and therefore naturally acquiesce in it, and frequently they go astray. Then they see that something happens in a way they had not expected, and they marvel, and then begin to doubt if the thing were of God, since it happens not, and they see it not according to their expectations. At the beginning they thought two things. First, that the vision was of God, since at the beginning it agreed so well with their disposition, and their natural inclination to that kind of thing may well have been the cause of this agreement, as we have said. And secondly, that being of God, it would turn out as they thought or expected. And herein lies a great delusion. For revelations or locutions which are of God do not always turn out as men expect, or as they imagine inwardly, and thus they must never be believed or trusted blindly, even though they are known to be revelations or answers or sayings of God. For although they may in themselves be certain and true, they are not always so in their causes, and according to our manner of understanding, as we shall prove in the chapter following. And afterwards we shall further say and prove that although God sometimes gives a supernatural answer to that which is asked of him, it is not his pleasure to do so, and sometimes, although he answers, he is angered. End of chapter 18.